All right, so to the guys watching on YouTube, this is a treat because we normally never record the podcast video-wise, but I got Nate Hake here.
Hey, how are you doing, guys?
And he's such a good-looking guy. I was like, I have to have him on camera. Plus, this $20 a night Airbnb is awesome, so enjoy this talk.
I'll invoice you for my modeling fee.
I love it. All right. Hey, everyone. This is Johnny, and welcome to episode 231 of the Travel Like a Boss podcast. I'm here today with Nate Hake from TravelLemming.com. How you doing?
How you doing, guys? Thanks for having me on, Johnny.
Yeah, I'm really excited. So Nate is most famous for being a very good-looking guy. But aside from that, he publishes a annual report called the Emerging
Destination Awards.
Travel Destinations Awards.
That's right.
And it's not just you picking it out of your butt. It's actual, like, some pretty big name travel bloggers that you get to be the judges, right?
Yeah, so we get tourism boards around the world to help us identify places that are really wonderful tourism destinations, but that don't have that many tourists, or at least are able to handle more tourists than they have, because we think that over-tourism is a problem, and a part of the solution has to be for people to spread out. And then we take those nominations to a panel of some of the top travel judges on the planet, and then we publish out the awards every year. So they'll come out in early November for this year.
Yeah, I think that's super cool that you do that. I mean, and the reason why I wanted to have you on today, it was a couple reasons. First, we've been having fun hanging out here in Georgia for a while.
It's not just the good looks.
Not just the good looks. But I feel like there's a lot of things to go over today. I mean, first is I definitely want to know what some of these top emerging destinations are and talk about them. Second, I also want to talk about just over tourism in general and kind of how that's kind of ruining some cities.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I also want to talk about this great kind of idea that you had of taking a travel blog that was really just you writing about just like a normal travel blog and making it into this big thing, this big collaboration, not only with other top travel bloggers but also with the tourism boards, and really making it into a successful, viable business and not just another travel blog.
Sure. Yeah.
So let's first talk about how we met, actually.
How did we meet? You want to remind me?
Was it in Ukraine?
Yeah, it would have probably been at one of the nomad meetups in Kyiv.
Yeah, and that's funny because the 2 episodes ago we had on the other Nathan.
Oh, yeah, Nathan Aguilera, foodie flashback, a good friend of mine.
Yeah, we met at the same time, I think.
Yeah, that's probably right.
Yeah, and we're all hanging out in Georgia for the last month. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's been fun. Both Kyiv and Tbilisi are really very different cities, but very good digital nomad cities.
Yeah, and I think for different reasons.
Yeah,
I would say Tbilisi is better for normal people who want like a comfortable, easy life.
Yeah,
where most things kind of work, everything's kind of cheap. I think Kiev is for people who like want that grittiness, like something really different. And I don't think life is very easy in Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, and Kiev's a much bigger city than Tbilisi, right? And the other thing that Tbilisi has that Kyiv doesn't is access to all of these wonderful mountain destinations and stuff. There's not a ton immediately accessible outside of Kyiv that you'd want to go see, other than Chernobyl, of course.
Yeah, and I guess like definitely nature-wise, Ukraine is kind of lacking on that. I know they have some really beautiful mountains, but they're hard to get to.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So let's talk about some. Okay, well, I guess first, like, what are your thoughts on over-tourism? Like, has it been a problem for a while, or do you think this is just a new, like, hot topic, or do you think it's an actual trending problem?
I mean, if you look at the statistics, it definitely, it has been a problem for some time. It's getting a lot of attention now for a number of reasons. One is that travel generally, international travel has been on the rise for a while now, driven by a bunch of trends, including a desire among the younger generations to travel more, the increased availability of low-cost flights, and the rise of the Chinese middle class, which is spending a lot of their money on travel. And so you're seeing some destinations like Venice and Amsterdam and even places like Prague and Barcelona that are getting to a point where tourists are really creating a problem. They're driving out locals away from, so that, if you're a local, you can't even live anywhere near the center. They're kind of making the destinations almost unenjoyable, particularly during high seasons. And if you go to some of these places, like people say if you go to Venice in like off season, it's actually perfectly wonderful. But during those busy months, it's really quite a problem. And so you're starting to see some destinations that are actually like stopping their tourism campaigns or thinking about like, should we actually be promoting more tourists to come here because maybe we're at a place where we can't handle it anymore.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. And it's a double-edged sword because a lot of places rely heavily on tourism dollars. And if it wasn't for tourists coming, they would be off the map, but also they would lose a ton of money. But at the same time, it's kind of like too much of a good thing and almost doing too good of a job promoting your city.
Right.
Ends up kind of biting you in the butt.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I think that, I think a part of the problem is that tourists have this tendency to always go to the same places. And that's nothing new, but social media definitely drives that. You'll see it where, a particular place will get hot on social media. Iceland's a perfect example of this. 10 years ago, there's hardly anything in terms of tourism in Iceland. And then they suddenly have this big that volcano issue that they had, and then there's all these beautiful photos of Iceland all over the news, and now it like goes viral, and everybody goes to Iceland, and now Iceland's over touristed in the span of less than a decade.
Yeah, I can definitely see that, and it just compounds because the more people who go, the more kind of FOMO people who've never been there feel, and then the more they like feel like, well, I have to go, or I feel left out, or I'm the only one without a photo at in this cool place, or they like a lot of it's a social status thing too, especially in mainland China, where Chinese people they have this concept of losing face, and like they feel like if they haven't been to the cool place that everyone else has been, then they're almost kind of lesser like status wise than other people. And they're also a little bit afraid of venturing out to new places completely on their own. A lot of it's language barrier where they don't speak the language. They like the package tours. They like it kind of being easy and having other people who've done it already in guides. So I think all of it kind of compounds. And then, obviously the more people go to a place, the more flights there become, the cheaper the flights become, and then the less reason there is not to go there, right?
Yeah, it's definitely true that tourism destinations will receive sort of critical mass of tourism to a certain point. But, I think one other trend among millennials is this sort of idea to be different. And that's something that we try to tap into. And so the whole sort of premise of emerging destinations is this idea that, look, tourism's not going anywhere. And those trends that are driving the increase of travel, they're not going to stop. And so, we may see us, if we're heading into a global recession, we may see a small downtick, but long-term tourism numbers are going to continue to go up. And so we have to think about how we do that sustainably as a world population. And I think a big part of the answer has to be just spreading out, because there's actually, in the 3 years I've been traveling the world, I've seen so many beautiful destinations that are like, wow, this is really incredible. Why isn't anyone here? And actually, when I first came to Georgia 2 years ago, that's how I felt about Georgia. And I still do to some degree. And, so I think that if people spread out and start, realizing that there's other places to go to, that has to be a big part of the solution.
I definitely agree. And I think that there's plenty of places in the world to go. I mean, even in like certain countries, for example, why is it that when people say they're going to France for a vacation, it's always Paris and it's always Eiffel Tower?
Yeah, that's right.
There's probably so many beautiful places in France, in the south, in the kind of the like mountain regions. People just don't go to it because it's not this photo opportunity where they have to have a photo with either the Eiffel Tower in France or in Paris, or the what is that new church, that big church in
the one that burned,
Barcelona.
Notre Dame?
No, Notre Dame. Okay,
right, the Sagrada Familia.
Yeah. Like that is kind of like the reason to go to Barcelona is just to take pictures there. And there's so many amazing places in Spain outside of Barcelona, like way better places, I think too, way cheaper, way better, but just everyone wants to go to Barcelona.
I mean, I think part of it is that's what people think about. If your average traveler back home is thinking about traveling and they haven't traveled before, the first things that come to mind are Paris and London and Tokyo. And those sort of places that have been in the popular lexicon forever, that you constantly see on social media. And so, what we're trying to do is we're trying to inject other destinations into the conversation.
Yeah, I like it. And I think that the second-tier destinations, second-tier cities, I don't even like that word because it makes it sound like it's lesser or not as good. But I feel like the second biggest city or the second most touristed city is often way better. Like, for example, Bangkok is probably the most touristed city in Thailand.
Right.
But Chiang Mai is way better in every way. It's
yeah.
cheaper, people are nicer, it's nice, like everything about it is better. Phuket is the most touristed island in Thailand, but or maybe Koh Phi Phi, but the lesser known ones like Koh Lanta or even like Railay Beach and Krabi are way nicer. Like they're just better in every way.
Yeah, Phuket is. Yeah, I was just living in Thailand last winter, and I avoided it like the plague, for sure.
Yeah, so I think by these emerging places being more popularized, it is a good thing for everyone because it spreads out the tourism dollars for the locals. It spreads out the number of people, so places don't get annoyingly over touristed. But it's also just nicer for like to be in, right? Because I would never ever ever want to go to places like even Athens or what's that really popular island, Santorini, during the peak of summer. It just would be frustrating and annoying.
Yeah, Santorini is nuts. I actually have an article on my site about why people should skip Santorini, and I have this photo where it's like 100 people jamming together to like get the iconic Santorini photo, and you can just see the same photo 100 times in all of their phones. And that was sort of my experience there. It was just pushing through the crowds, and even at the school there in Santorini, I remember they had signs for tourists saying don't take photos of the children, because this was something they had to do. They had to put up signs everywhere because people were just taking photos of kids playing on a playground.
Yeah, and I actually went to Santorini in like April or something last year, and I was like, oh, this place is great. Like, there's not that many people. Like,
if you're in April, yeah, that's right. I mean, again, it doesn't matter what season you go in, for sure.
Yeah. And I think that's another big part of it is if you guys, I'm not specifically saying to you, the one listening, but just in general for travelers, there are ways to enjoy a place that's even a super touristy place. Is just to go in the off season or go like on a time that the kids are in school or people don't have that winter break or like the summer break.
Yeah, off season's great, and accommodation tends to be cheaper as well, and there's fewer people there, so for sure.
So I guess one question would be like, I mean, people, they can look at us and be like, all right, well, you guys are traveling full time, you're going to some of these places, you're staying on Airbnbs. Are we part of the problem? Are digital nomads part of the problem?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on where you're going, right? And, an Airbnb is certainly a controversial issue because there are places where, Airbnbs take homes away from locals. On the other hand, they raise the value of local homes. And so it depends on who's owning them, right? Because you'll have a lot of these Airbnbs that are owned by these big management companies that own 100 of them. And maybe they're foreign backed. And so the money's not even going into the local economy. Here in Tbilisi, I'm staying in a unit that a family basically converted out of their own house into their own little Airbnb, and so they own it, just owned by that family, and they're getting all the money out of it, and so that's contributing to the local economy. I mean, of course, Airbnb takes its cut as the booking platform. I wish there was a better alternative to Airbnb, but there isn't, and so I think that's definitely true, and I think that there also has to be sort of consideration of where you live. I often will live in further out neighborhoods. The neighborhood that even you were in right now isn't super touristy. It's not an old town Tbilisi, which is the kind of place where you are starting to see a little bit in Tbilisi of the Airbnb pushing people out. But, if you're in a neighborhood where it's mostly locals, I think that's one way of helping contribute to the problem. And overall, I mean, if you talk to Georgians, they very much want digital nomads to come here. They're very, they've taken a big hit recently with Russia canceling flights to Georgia, and they're very eager to have the money that nomads inject into the economy. And I think nomads are better tourists than your average tourist because they stay for longer. They spend money at, I think, tends to be more local places. They're going to local cafes, local restaurants, local bars, and tend to live a little bit more like a local. So more of that money is going back in the economy and not to the Hyatts and the Marriotts and the big foreign tour companies.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think it was Kristen Wilson. She had an article about if digital nomads are affecting over tourism. And she broke it down really good. I think it was a Medium article. And the kind of the big premise of it was, or the finding of it was, first, there's not that many of us, even though we think there's a lot. There's probably thousands, tens of thousands, maybe 100,000 of us in the world, but we're pretty spread out. There's so really very, very insignificant amount of people compared to mass tourism. But second, exactly what you had said is that we live more like locals, and we're also like very budget conscious, where we won't go and spend $100 a night on a hotel or on an Airbnb for one night. We'll get a place for, like, let's say a month at a time. That's maybe a little bit more than what a local would pay, but not that much more. We also kind of like and support, nicer places. So in a sense, we are helping gentrify neighborhoods, but in a sense, we're also helping build up nicer neighborhoods and nicer places to live, supporting, nicer restaurants, and not like fancy restaurants, but just kind of trendier places, more hipster places, hipster coffee shops, office spaces, things like that overall are probably good for the economy.
Yeah, that's right. And look, like I always tell people, when people talk about the fact that your tourism dollars can, if spent in a certain way, contribute to problems, it's like, one, be responsible about how you spend your money, and two, realize that if you don't travel, that money's going to get spent somewhere else. And if you're at home and you're spending money on buying things, that has a whole wave of social problems that comes with it as well. So, any way that you spend your money, whether you're living back in the States and you're just buying things on Amazon every day with what you have, or if you're out traveling, you have to sort of be socially responsible about it.
Yeah. Okay. I can see that. I also think, so there was a Wendover Productions YouTube video explaining over tourism, and one of the reasons why they say that short-term travelers are so bad for cities is because everybody crowds to the same location every day, right? So for example, let's say, here's the difference between a typical kind of quick traveler and a longer term traveler. So let's say we go to a very popular city like Barcelona, for example. Every single person who goes to Barcelona will go to the hotspot. I cannot pronounce it for the life of me.
Sagrada Familia. Yeah.
You just have to go, right? 100% of people are going to go. But you only go once. Nobody goes there every day they're there, right? So if you are a long-term traveler and you're staying for a month or 3 months, you'll go one time. So you're contributing to 1x unit of over tourism there, right? Versus if you are like a normal tourist and you're there for 1 day or 3 days, and you're going to go during that time you're there, and then the very next day someone else comes and they replace your hotel room or your Airbnb with the new tourist. Basically, in that same month, you have 30 people visiting that same spot, which leads to the over-tourism, the congestion, the traffic, the annoyance, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. So if everybody just traveled slower and spent more time in each city or each country, there just wouldn't be that congestion, especially at the hotspots.
Yeah, I mean, travel pace is an interesting thing, because I've had it travel with me, and I forgot that I used to be like this back when I was working a corporate job where, especially Americans only get a limited amount of vacations. We tend to just rush through destinations. I used to do 2-week vacations where I would hit 5 countries in 2 weeks, which is crazy.
Wow.
And now, yeah, totally.
But people do that. And a typical, it would not be weird for an American to say, okay, I'm going to Europe this summer. I have 2-week vacation, which means I have 10 days in Europe. So I'm going to go I'm going to fly into Amsterdam. And then the next day, I'm going to go to Paris. The next day, I'm going to go to Barcelona. The next day, I'm going to go to Rome. Then Venice.
Yeah, you will get people who will spend 1 or 2 nights in these places. And, slower travel for sure helps. It's definitely also more environmentally friendly because you have less transportation costs involved. I mean, there's a whole suite of solutions that have to be a part of addressing over-tourism. I'm focusing on just, laser focused on the one because I can't solve everything. And I think it's fun. And I think, generally speaking, I just think that there's so many more beautiful places in the world than people realize, just completely undiscovered, or not undiscovered. And I actually don't like that word because it has colonial implications to it, but places that aren't in the popular sort of imagination right now. And And it's not just the ones that we've sort of heard about since our childhood. And I would never tell somebody like, don't go to London or New York or Paris. Like, yeah.
I told them all the time. Like, especially like, and you know, like even my parents, like my mom's like, oh, I really want to go to Paris, and I really want to go to, you know, Rome, really want to go to, you know, and she's just naming the places that she heard about,
Right.
like 20 years ago, or all her friends have been to, and I'm like, no, I don't want to go. Like, we can go to Europe, or I'll happily even pay for your trip to go to Europe, but let's go to,
Right.
you know, XYZ place, you know. And she's like, no, I don't want to go. I never heard of it. None of my friends have heard of it, so there's no bragging rights if I go. And I was just say to her then, like,
Yeah,
right,
I mean,
why
you know,
would I
look,
go?
I think if it's hard to sometimes forget what it's like to not have traveled when you've traveled as extensively as we have, and as a lot of nomads that have out there. When it is your life, it's hard to forget what it's like to go to your first country. And for me, that was something I did as a child. So, you know, it's, if that's what gets somebody traveling, like, that's great. But I think soon thereafter, we have to start sort of encouraging people to think of other destinations and not to just, you know, always be going to sort of the top hits. And the bigger that we can make the menu, the more items that we present to people to order off of for their travel, I think that's going to make it easier for people to spread out.
I think you're a lot nicer guy than I am. I think I'm all about travel shaming people. Just like they're like when they take that same selfie or that same photo at these kind of, you know, at
Right.
like these overcrowded places. Like, I'm just like, no, like I'm not going to congratulate you for making it to, you know, like Seguro Familia or the Eiffel Tower or whatever. Like, it's and here's the problem is everyone's like, well, I'm just going to go once. Well, yeah, of course, right? Like, no one's going to go more than once. But it's the same problem with like people saying, all right, well, I'm only getting married once. I'm only going to buy a blood diamond once, or I'm only going to have shark fin soup once. Like, and like, yeah, it's true. Everyone's just doing it once in their life. But if every single person in the world, and there's billions of us, right? Like that's what kind of ruins everything. I almost think that, especially with the millennials that like being different, being, you know, and having this different opportunity, I think it's really nice to be able to encourage people to say, you know what, you don't need to go that once. Just say you've been there and you didn't like it. We can just skip it and just go to these other cool places and completely skip that tourist place in the first place. Yeah. So what are some of the places that won?
So we have
last
a
year?
long list every year. I think it's about 40 destinations. We do a list by continent. Some of our big winners, because we do an overall sort of winners, included this town called Valladolid in Mexico, which is one of my favorite towns. It's somewhere between a town and a city. It's about 100,000 people. It's interesting because it's this small Mexican town in the middle of the jungle, not that far. It's about 45 minutes from Chichen Itza, which is one of the new 7 wonders of the world. And it's only an hour from Tulum, which is one of the boomingest, tourism destinations in Mexico and really the whole world at this point. And yet, the vast majority of people who go to those destinations either don't know anything about Valladolid, or if they do, they just stop over briefly for a restroom break on their way to Chichen Itza. And you can go to this this really incredible old colonial town that's just filled with cenotes, which I know you know what cenotes are, but for any listeners who don't know, cenotes are, I call them dinosaur swimming holes, because they were actually formed in part by the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs, that hit in the Yucatan Peninsula and contributed to these sort of breaks in the limestone bedrock that fill up with spring water, and you can go swimming in them. So it's very sort of Indiana Jones esque when you're going in these cenotes, and they just have some like stunning ones there, including like in the middle of the town. Like, you just walk a few blocks away from the main square, and you can go to some of these, lots of really traditional cultural performances, and you can walk down the streets and not see another tourist at all. And it's just a wonderful town that I think is true Mexico. And in the Yucatan, which is a destination that's so filled with sort of beach tourism and whatnot, it's really refreshing to see that. And so that town was great. They won. I traveled there to present them with the award in March, and they showed up, and they were like, do you want to have dinner with the mayor to present the award? And I was like, sure. And I show up, and they have a 150-person banquet for me. They brought out like the town's like dancers. They had the press there, and I was just like super caught off guard. I had they asked me to say a few words, but nobody there spoke English, so I did the whole thing in Spanish, and managed to, I sort of explained the idea behind the awards, and I just told them why I thought Valladolid was such a wonderful place. And I think it was really interesting because we had so many locals that come up to me when I go to Valladolid now, and are just, so eager to have people come visit their town because they really love it and they want to share it with the world. And I think that's what's really cool about a lot of these destinations that we have is that the locals are eager for tourism to come, which is the very opposite of what you see in places like Venice and Amsterdam.